Well, hello there, and welcome to day 74 of A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. Today, beginning the epic journey that started possibly the entire superhero genre franchise, Superman, the motion picture. And just to add effect, the special edition version. Although I've come to realise one of the big problems with doing this series in the way that I do, scheduling it and watching things like special editions, is I haven't really had time to look into the special edition. And this reminds me of when I was a kid and I first saw Star Wars. And the first version of Star Wars I saw was a box set given to me of the original trilogy by my cousin, and it was the extended edition. Which means I grew up thinking sequences like the one with Jabba in New Hope where Han steps on his tail, or like in Return of the Jedi with the extended music video. I assumed those were part of the film, just always. Only years later discovering, oh no, that was George Lucas trying to build on masterpieces. But I just had no way of extrapolating. And similarly with this, I have no way of determining which parts of this film, having seen the original a few times before, knowing what parts were extended, what scenes were added. So I'm going to have to talk about this as if this is just what the film was like. And I may refer to things that aren't in the original cut. So apologies, but I have to say, if you want my opinion, because I'm going to delve deep into this, I'm going to talk quite extensively about my relationship with Superman, the film, the legacy, as much as I can in a short amount of time as possible. But if you want my opinion, go and watch Superman 1978. It's more of a classic than I could possibly imagine it was or remember. Of course, this is not my first viewing of this film. I grew up sort of with that tangential relationship with Superman. He was never my favourite superhero. I was always a Batman kid. But, I watched the animated series alongside the Batman animated series. I watched Justice League. I watched Smallville in my teenage years. And in sort of various states, I would watch bits of each of the, we're going to kindly say 4 original Superman film. And the problem is that kind of relationship with the 4 films where you're jumping around and I'm watching bits of one, or I might catch the second half of the original film, maybe I would watch the second film in its entirety, but maybe it was before I saw the first one, and so I didn't have this sense of, like you would with, say, as I mentioned, Star Wars or the Batman '89 films, where I watched them fairly sequentially, and I had a really clear outline of the stories in my mind. The Superman films, I just remember being very saccharine, very dated, and the effects just being this sort of old-timey, exciting for 1978, but not great, And so the thing is, I think it's taken me a long time to finally come round to understanding what makes Superman the Motion Picture truly one of the greats, like one of the great feats of cinema and storytelling and the advancement of how film can tell stories that transcend imagination, that can express things that we couldn't have thought of before they were made. And you put Star Wars in that category, and you put Superman in that category, and there were possibly other films from that sort of 70s into 80s eras that really, that was the point when we were seeing films that really sort of allowed us to think, oh, these things would be possible to, to express or tell. And I think that hadn't, this is the film where the tagline was "You'll believe a man can fly," because before this film, it just wasn't conceivable in cinema. The effects work wasn't possible to create that authentic type of set piece. And as I say, it's not as if this is revelatory to me. I did, like I said, I did watch Smallville, and that was probably the point in which I was starting to get into Superman. However, I now, in hindsight, realise that the Smallville version of Superman isn't really Superman. It's a diminished version. That you have something like, I remember seeing, I seem to think I've seen Superman Returns, maybe not its entirety, but enough of it to know I didn't like it, and I don't think I'd like it now. Now, I could stand corrected in the same way as when I watched this time. I really felt something quite powerful, but I feel like I wouldn't have that same effect. And then we get to Man of Steel, and I genuinely think Man of Steel is a great Superman film. I don't think it tells the perfect Superman story. I think it has problems like Snyder's desire to lean to the sort of the darker side of storytelling, and it's a hangover from the Dark Knight trilogy, wanting that heavier, more bitter, kind of realistic and yet not kind of storytelling. But I think Man of Steel was the point in which my eyes were open to telling a Superman story, because that was the point in my experience when the effects could represent that kind of world building and could represent how I conceived of someone with those powers and that scale to it. I mean, we then go on to, and so even to this day I will still defend Man of Steel, and there are things in it that aren't perfect, that there are arcs of the story and there are things that don't quite work, and it does have this meanness to it that I really think this film is almost like the counter to. I'll get onto that imminently, but you get onto things like, later to Batman versus Superman and onto the Justice League film or films, and for what they are, I think they're fine, but they're not what I thought Man of Steel was sort of preparing, and they became something else. And the reason I'm watching the Superman film is to, by the end of this week, watch the Snyder cut of Superman of Justice League, so that I can re-examine what Zack Snyder was trying to tell in his what is now going to be a trilogy between Man of Steel, Batman vs Superman, and Justice League. But as I say, this is Snyder's version, and he has a much darker sensibility that I don't think reflects a great Superman story. What I think Richard Donner achieves with this is he is able to create... He creates a pathos and a legacy, and yet a sense of hope that, yes, a younger version of myself would call it saccharine, and a younger version of myself would say, oh, it's too soft and it lacks any real grittiness to it. But perhaps it's at the point in which I'm in my life, or the world we live in now, but something just that little bit more sentimental, just that little bit more hopeful. It's quite nice to have, really, having this kind of story kind of inject that. I think as well, the problem I had with the Donner Superman era is that it really gets intertwined with the Richard Lester Superman era, of course, which is part of Superman 2 and Superman 3. And then Superman 4 is neither Richard Donner or Richard Lester's fault, but that muddies the water further, because all of a sudden those four films become interconnected, and it's hard to sort of extract one from the other, which is a shame, because I genuinely think Richard Donner has a distinct voice from Richard Lester from whatever the heck Quest for Peace was. And I think what Superman the Motion Picture does is it creates this epic tale that's really full of scale and pace. And what I didn't realise, and watching this I was amazed by, is it really goes to task to take its time to tell this story, to build to the revelation of Superman in the world. We spend a good half an hour with Jor-El and the destruction of Krypton, and yes, you know, so does the Man of Steel version, but there's something about this that really, you don't know what film. I was trying to see this film on this viewing through the eyes of someone who had never seen, someone from 1978 who had never seen a Superman in live action, who only, you know, hadn't really seen a film like this. And you spend the first half an hour, and it's more like a sort of Greek myth Star Wars, where you have the John Williams sort of the score, you have the sort of sci-fi, and yet, like I say, there's something almost Greek myth about it, something quite ancient in how it's represented. And you have Terence Stamp being phenomenal, and Marlon Brando, who, in spite of the fact that he's reading from cue cards, has this gravitas to him, and this sense of, I don't know, this weight in his performance that you know, only a Marlon Brando could portray something like that. And like I say, so you spend a long section with the destruction of Krypton, and it really does build that sense of ominous despair, of a world coming to its end, the end of a story before the next story begins. And so by the time you get to Clark Kent landing in Smallville, you feel like you know that this story is going to be more than a small town hero who becomes this silly toy, this silly cartoon comic book character. That it set the stage for an epic tale, which I genuinely think you couldn't do without the 20-30 minutes on Krypton. And yes, I said Krypton, yes. In honour of Marlon Brando. And so when you get to the stuff in Smallville, and it's building the character of Clark Kent, and again, this takes its time. You really get that sense of you know, a small town boy, and the repression of his own abilities, and what it's doing is slowly, for your audience, unveiling what he can do in a way that could be digested. So of course he's faster than a train, and he can kick a football into space, and all that kind of stuff, but you're slowly having that unveiled. But what I think is a phenomenal, it perhaps is not the right term, but when you get to the death of Jonathan Kent, there's something quite powerful about that. And I'm aware that in the comic books they've done similar kinds of storytelling, where Jonathan Kent should die of something like a heart attack, because, and bringing back to Man of Steel, this is one of the great failings of Man of Steel, is that Jonathan Kent in Man of Steel dies because of a tornado that he then instructs Clark Kent not to save him from. And it's not right, it's not the kind, it's not the way that story should go. The reason that Jonathan Kent should die of a heart attack is one, that it's almost mundane, it's almost like a really simple way to die, but also it's the fact that in spite of his power, the arc of Superman is the knowledge that he cannot stop everything, and he doesn't have in spite of all of his powers, he can't stop a heart attack from happening, or bring someone back from a heart attack. You know, he can do things, but it's limited, and that there is, in spite of his power, restrictions, and the restrictions are the laws of nature themselves. Now, I'm aware that this film then completely tries to subvert that, and I'll get onto that shortly. But I think setting that boundary is really important, and the idea that there are things that he cannot do, and he cannot prevent natural death. And then you get back to the epicness with Jor-El and the introduction of Jor-El and the building of the fortress. And then we are we're 50 minutes in before we even arrive in Metropolis and we have a fully formed Clark Kent. And I think it's an hour and 75 minutes before we have Superman, which is kind of like, it's bonkers. And again, yes, I'm sure that's probably what Man of Steel did. But I think the fact that this film absolutely took as much time as it needed to get to Superman, so that by the time he arrives and he's just doing the everyday Superman thing, saving people, it feels earned. It feels like it's balanced out the way that you could represent this god being who comes from a race of god beings, but then also this small town boy who just simply wants his place in the world. It brings them together in a really nice way, so that when he's doing these small things, you know, like okay, he's doing things like stopping shootouts in cars, and then he's also, you know, lifting cats out of trees. You believe it because for Superman, he is just trying to do the everyday. He's trying to just go, there is a problem and that'll fix it. And that's the thing I don't think I understood as a kid. Because as a kid, you want to think, well, he's Superman. Why isn't he saving the world? And the story of Superman is not about saving the world. It's about saving the everyday. And by saving the everyday, the hope is that you will then save the world because people will get better from that. And so that's really, you know, that's the kind of story that Richard Donner really is portraying in this. And therefore you can have the injection of sort of this silly humour. You could have the pimp who says that's one fly outfit, which is just, it's so odd and out of place, but yet the humour of that is so well chosen that it feels wonderful. Or, you know, you have this nice humour to it that's natural and feels like people, but also, and it doesn't feel metatextual, it feels like just fun. And then you get to the introduction of Lex Luthor, which again, you're an hour and a half in, you know, there's only an hour to the end, or an hour and some change, and then you have Lex Luthor introduced. And Gene Hackman, you know, again, like Marlon Brando, he fills the space. And I was thinking about this. I was thinking about Lex Luthor and the portrayals. And I know we've had Kevin Spacey, who played him, and putting that aside. And then we had Jesse Eisenberg, who, at the time of Batman vs. Superman, I said, he's fine. He's doing something interesting. He's sort of taking Lex Luthor in a different direction. In hindsight, no, hate it. I do agree that actually it doesn't work. It feels more like a Joker or Riddler kind of portrayal. It's not an authentic Lex Luthor. And if you're not, and I've seen Supergirl, and I've seen oh, blimey neck, I've forgotten his name, but the actor who plays Lex Luthor in Supergirl feels like a serious Lex Luthor, and the one that people probably wanted. In the same way that Michael Rosenberg, who played him in Smallville, people have said is the perfect Lex Luthor. But I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about the fact that in the films, if you wanted a Lex Luthor, people always point to Bryan Cranston and go, Bryan Cranston would have made a great, serious Lex Luthor. But if you wanted a Gene Hackman-style Lex Luthor, to me, it's the other Breaking Bad alum who feels like would fit that ilk of the character, which is Bob Odenkirk, who I think could do a really interesting Gene Hackman-esque Lex Luthor. But as I say, that's sort of speculative, fantasy sort of casting. But it was just a thought that occurred to me that someone like Rob Odenkirk would have that kind of humour and yet seriousness. You know, and he's demonstrated range through Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, and so he could do the darker side of Lex Luthor, who would have a man be pushed in front of a train, but also the humour of it. This also comes to probably one of my only criticisms of the film, which is the humour. Where I think, like I said, when it comes to the world, the humour fits quite nicely. It has this nice humanity to it. I think the point where it gets a little bit overstretched is the stuff with Lex and Otis, particularly the sort of comedy. I was okay with the banter when it's them in his office and they're sort of discussing plans, but when it gets to the setting of the missile and Otis is getting it wrong, that's the point where it gets just that little bit too silly for me. And you think, oh, you've set Lex Luthor up as this genius and this mad scientist slash business developer, and you give him this sort of ridiculousness, and you could say the same with Tessmacher as well, particularly how it solves the kryptonite problem. And it's a shame because I think the humour, that silliness possibly is the only mark against this almost perfect film. And again, just the wonderment of the fact that, you know, Lex Luthor and Superman don't actually interact until, 3/4 of the way through the film, at which point it's one interaction, and then that's it, and then it moves on. Because the final set piece, and this is the thing that I didn't understand as a kid, because that was a reason why I wanted to watch Superman 2, and why I didn't get the original Superman films, is I wanted Superman to be punching an enemy and fighting like a Doomsday, or you know, a Brainiac or a Darkseid or something. What I've understood as an adult is that having the environment itself be the threat demonstrates the fact that Superman is trying to overcome this possibly insurmountable catastrophe. And the parallels between the opening section with the destruction of Krypton and the fact that climate is what destroys it, in parallel to this, and maybe even now in 2021 with our concerns about climate, it feels like it has an even greater relevance. And the idea that Superman is trying his best to hold everything together in spite of the fact that he is not fighting an enemy, he is fighting the very... I mean, okay, it's triggered by a person, but he's fighting the climate itself. And then, of course, you get to the death of Lois. And the thing I've never credited this film for is the fact that the death of Lois Lane is almost necessary, because like the death of Jonathan Kent, what it shows you is the failure. And as I say, jumping back into the seat of someone who might have never picked up a Superman comic, but is watching this film for the first time and has never seen anything like it on the cinema. The idea that the protagonist's love interest dies quite horribly, there's nothing to say in the context of the narrative that she'll make it out. And so you have this pretty brutal death, and then you get the scene where he's holding her body, and the music cuts out, and the sound design really tones down, and it's almost silent, and you think, oh my god, they've actually killed her. And then it does the thing which people have debated and discussed for years, the turning back of the planet. And yes, narratively it's a cheat, and yes, the science doesn't make sense, and yes, it feels... But I think I now understand it. As I say, there are things in this I understand better than I have ever done before, which is, it's the idea that in spite of the fact that we've set limitations on Superman, that he cannot prevent death, he cannot prevent the natural order of the universe. Just this once, he manages to do so. He manages to undo nature itself, the universe itself, in spite of the fact that it's forbidden. And I like it. I do. I really do. I watching it this time, it really feels like, oh, I understand what they're going for. I really do understand what they're trying to say here. And then that's the end of the film. You know, I've been saying this a lot with the classic films, that I'm and particularly the musicals, that I'm quite surprised about how quickly they just go, okay, and it's the end now. And once again, with Superman, you know, it just ends. He quickly drops Lex Luthor off in prison. Before that he says goodbye to Lois and Jimmy. He drops Lex in prison, flies into space. End of film. And it's again, there's something about not overstaying your welcome, which is quite remarkable about this film. That it's just like, yep, over. And of course, the reason being that it was setting up for the second film. And it's interesting, really, now that the drama over Superman 2, the firing of Richard Donner and the replacement of Richard Lester. As I've said, as part of this series, I'm not going to be rewatching all the Superman films because I've seen them, and none of them are as good as this. And frankly, Superman 2 has some great moments, but it's flawed because of the Lester stuff. Superman 3 is even more flawed because it's all Lester and it's just something else. And Superman 4 let's just not talk about that. But I'm very tempted, very, very tempted to go back and watch the Donner cut, because I've not seen the Richard Donner cut of Superman 2 that they've now recreated with his assistance, and I'm intrigued to see what that film looks like. Having seen this and seen the epic scale of it and the ambition and the fact that it clearly was setting up for Superman 2, and perhaps if Richard Donner had finished Superman 2, maybe he would have set up for a Superman 3, because I would have loved to see what if he had retained control of the narrative across the films. I would love to have seen what the Superman legacy would have looked like under his tutelage, but that's not what happened. But consequently, I do want to go back and watch the Donner cut. So yeah, this is a phenomenal film. I know I've mentioned Marlon Brando and I've mentioned Gene Hackman, but credit to Christopher Reeves. Truly, he puts such a varied performance in it, and so much range and ability. And he is, the fact that this was him, his first role in. And the level of craft that he put into this is truly what makes this. He has to be credited as really this film, wouldn't be what it is without him. And again, Margot Kidder, who does a wonderful Lois Lane. The scene where he flies her into space has such a fairy tale aesthetic, and they have such a nice chemistry, both as him as Clark Kent and him as Superman. Yes, I think they really work well together, and I do like the banter and the sharpness of Margot Kidder's Lois Lane. If I had one other gripe, I don't love the spoken word poetry sequence during the flight. I think that possibly, I don't know, it's a little bit silly, and I understand what they're going for, because again, it's Peter Pan, it's fairy tale, and it fits into sort of that epicness of it, the mythology, the mythology of it all, but it just doesn't quite work for me. But as I say, I think she gives a great performance. I think Christopher Reeves gives a great performance. I genuinely think this is a great film. That this alongside Star Wars, this defines the genres going forward, respectively. And we wouldn't be where we are without Superman the Motion Picture. And I'm so glad that I decided to cram this in this week. And yes, I will get to the Snyder Cut, and I'll be interested to see, if this is the beginning of the journey, then the Snyder Cut, I suppose, is the latest step of the journey, and I'll be interested to see what that looks like. I'm aware, we have the Superman and Lois TV series, and I can't wait till it comes to the UK fully. And the clips that I have seen, I do think, wow, I hope this is the representation of Superman that I think really honours the Reeves, or is a modernisation, and yet feels like it has more relationship to the Reeves Superman. And I'm aware J.J. Abrams is now about to start a new Superman film, and I genuinely hope that that knowing JJ's style and his storytelling, I really do hope there's something of the magic of this in that. So yeah, I'm delighted. I'm really happy to have started the week this way. Well, if you could like this video, that really helps me out. If you could subscribe to the channel and click the bell to get notifications when new videos are up, that helps me build the channel. If you could go through some of my older videos. You know, we're now on the 74th, so there are a lot of different kinds of videos across my channel. And if you could share some of those videos, again, this helps me build the platform and build the channel. Also, follow me on Twitter at Jordan_Woodley, where I post every day links to the videos anyway. So, I'll see you again tomorrow. Take care.